You're listening to Distraction Therapy with Rob Watson. Conversations about how we find meaning in our lives and what it's like to be part of a metamodern world. Okay, video's running now, so we're recording. So welcome to another episode of Distractions Therapy. I'm Rob Watson, and today I'm with Ryan Clayton.
Hello.
And we're just going to have a kind of walk and talk today, and kind of contemplate the experience the experience of being in I suppose in Leicester at the moment.
Cesspool of England.
Well, it gets described like that sometimes, but it's
what was it you said to me once? All of the ish rolls downhill.
Well, somebody described to me that Leicester was the armpit of England, and maybe it is, and perhaps we're being harsh and judgmental about that. But
it is, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I was looking at was the kind of looking for definitions of what metamodernism is or might be, and it's described often as a kind of dualism between things like sincerity and irony, or authenticity and simulation. I've got a list somewhere. It's and what the things are, and kind of some way that we're caught in that in the oscillation between those two factors. So we got kind of the difference between enthusiasm and irony, the hope and melancholy, the kind of naivety and knownness, about the difference between a kind of a modern and a postmodern experience. And I just wanted to kind of see if we could figure out a way through it, and how is this seen in, if you like, the places that we live, the places that we belong to or are a part of, and the kind of culture that we engage with, and what we, you and I maybe, as our experience of this, and how we find it through the things that we watch, read, listen to, and what we see of other people engaging with and producing culture, and how it's expressed in that. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense, actually. I find that oscillation interesting, particularly because I was going to query you on what you meant by like duality between cynicism and sincerity, because it's things you don't often seem or find existing within the same sphere together in works of art in particular. Something's either achingly sincere to the point of
nausea.
Yeah, exactly. or so cynical it engenders the same kind of nauseous response, where it just feels very, especially at this point now that you could argue postmodernism has worked its way through its culture so thoroughly, that it feels a bit like, yeah, okay, we get it, life's pretty ish.
And then what?
Well, and then you die.
Yeah, that kind of fatalism. And what do you do in between? You just satisfy your own urges, I suppose.
Well, yeah, because I suppose in a sort of postmodern interpretation of existence, what else is there? Nothing else is left, really, because the sort of meta-narratives that guide things like knowledge are totally disrupted. I mean, what's left?
Well, people aren't living their lives on that basis, that they're grappling with maybe not at a conscious level, maybe at an unconscious level people are doing this, that there's somehow an existential fragmentation. And that's one of the dualities is between fragmentation and unity of a kind of social experience, is that we're a cognitive or mental experience or a psychic experience, is that you live in a world which feels, for me perhaps, that it's crumbling around us, and you're kind of powerless to unite that. But is that a false thing to think about?
No, I don't think so.
I'm following you, by the way. So.
Oh, you're following. Let's go this way.
So wherever we go.
Because when I think about cynicism, particularly in popular culture, my mind always goes back to Seinfeld. I don't know how much you've seen of it, but
Quite a lot.
Yeah. Horrible people doing horrible things, placed as the heroes of the story, getting away with it every time.
No hugging, no learning.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel, that was the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, late 80s, early mid 90s. And that's often kind of paraded as what's his name? Charlie Brooker was writing about it in The Guardian, in the 90s, and paraded it as the pre-internet, or the introduction of the internet, and paraded it as the defining quality of the zeitgeist, if you like, that kind of cynicism. But it was replaced by Friends, which went the opposite direction, had this cloying sentimentality to it, which I could never, which lots of people like, but I could never appreciate.
Friends is interesting as well, because I'm not entirely convinced it was able to escape the cynicism of its time either, because the protagonists of that show aren't really good people either, and oftentimes are, when you watch it from a kind of modern perspective, where today's media and similar sitcoms are so filled with a heartfelt sincerity that you can't. I'm really struggling to put this into words now, but you can't escape the idea that was almost like cynicism working its way through and then simultaneously out of popular culture.
Well, that's what popular culture does. It manifests the mood, doesn't it? We think of popular culture in many ways as it's like bricks that are there, but somebody's had to come up with the idea of the way that brick is manufactured. The role of that brick, the function of it within a bigger system, and we can judge our culture by the individual artifacts that are around us that we see. But at the same time, that doesn't tell us what the house is going to be like. If you like, we can look at the brick, but we can't see what it's actually going to be a component of. We can extrapolate for that, but until we've got some time behind us to see what was actually built, we can't really get a sense of what the value of or what the purpose of that individual component was. Which is it tells you where you are. It gives you a hint of where you're going, but it doesn't tell you really what what you're going to gain as a perspective in the future when you look back on it. It has to unfold in time.
And let's go this way. One of the things I find moderately interesting about the way sincerity seems to be working its way through popular culture at the moment, particularly, is the way it, as opposed to cynicism, tends to suggest that a better way of relating to and existing within the world, it's not one that's closed off and detached and self-involved. It's one that involves very much other people, and the recognition that other people and other things can be important to you and guide your life in a meaningful way. When you look at...
That's much more optimistic and what's the word I'm looking for? Altruistic, I suppose, than I would have expected from you. I thought you were kind of a Nietzschean nihilist, and I said it's all worthless.
Well, it both is and it isn't. There's a kind of... It's almost something that has to be worked through to get out the other side. Kind of like how... to bring him up again, how Heidegger talks about death. There's a way of reading Heidegger, and even Nietzsche, that fully embraces a kind of depression on a mass cultural level, to the degree where it's something that has to be worked through so you can get to the other side and realise true value. And maybe that's something we're seeing happen in culture right now. It feels very much like we're on the tail end of it now at this point.
I'm not too certain we're on the tail end of it, but I think we're at the danger is we're at the foothills of it, and or we're at the ridge of the valley, if you like, and we have to descend much further. It's
when you're considering things on a mass scale, on a cultural scale, these things obviously take quite a long time, which is why I feel like it's often helpful to think of these things in terms of an individual level and then extrapolate outwards. I've always been fascinated with the idea of a born-again Christian, because I think it's one of those ideas that resonates, particularly when you talk about death. And they've, in Christian spheres, embraced the idea in some aspects that in order to live a meaningful existence, you first have to die. And maybe that cynicism is sort of analogous to a kind of worldly death where nothing matters. You should just be in it for yourself. What is there more to do than just sort of embrace selfish, hedonistic activities? And then when you come out the other side of that, when you stare that in the face, the first thing you have to do, and this is what I find so interesting about metamodernism and our conversations, is that you have to find a way to build that back up, that structure of meaning that you've talked about before.
Well, there's so many things you're kind of triggering in my mind about. The resonance with Jung in that respect is, one of the things he says is, the thing that will transform you, you have to look at the place or the things that you least want to look at in order to find the transformation that will change what you do. But also that it's, the symbolic transformation is carried through religious practice, if you like, which then is transformed into a psychological manifestation and phenomena of our sense of who we are. But we've become, let's I think it's worth spending a little bit of time, because I'd like, maybe as a way of articulating something for myself, which is that just how, we've just walking past a group of people there, one woman who's just drinking a can of lager and is vomiting onto the street. We're just by Leicester Haymarket bus station, and I have this problem with explaining to people how fragile things feel psychically at the moment. And whether that's just, what Jung says is, as above, so below, and as within, so without. Is this just me feeling, fragile and what's the word I'm looking for? Disassociated with anything coherent, or is that a manifestation in culture that is kind of bouncing back off me, if you like? And when we look around, I had a day in Derby the other day, and I came back almost feeling as if I was on the edge of a nervous breakdown, because it was just 5 minutes away from being either somebody having a breakdown or somebody having a fight. And I didn't think it looked like, observing people and watching people, that there was much in a sense of coherent, secure, well-balanced cultural engagement with one another. It felt very either disillusioned when you were or delusional when you're walking around the shopping centre. They've got this massive shopping centre in Derby, which dominates most of the town and has absorbed most of the trade from the old town, what we might call the old town. And the old town itself is pretty bereft. There's a lot of substandard shops and empty shop units there, which not very many people walk around or frequent. And so you've got this kind of thing that plays almost like a kind of the image that comes to my mind is like a board game of chess, but it's got a mixture of different types of games on the board, and nobody knows what kind of game they're supposed to be playing. Nobody much cares, and nobody has a coherent sense of what brings this game together. And it's expressed, we see it, and we look around us, and we see how it's kind of played out, just in the places where we walk about, and the people that we interact with, and the kind of resources that we've got access to. There's something not right in the state of Denmark.
Well, like you say, as above, so below. You know, there's a great contingency. Is it contingent? Is that the word I'm looking for? Yeah, there's a great contingency to all things. Things could always be other than what they are. And I feel like in a world that has allowed, you know, for a certain amount of time, postmodernism to work its sort of dark magic, there's almost an unconscious recognition of that. The like you say, the fragility of things, what is holding everything together, what's stopping people from just decking you on the street, or from the entire social system we exist in from collapsing into like a Mad Max-esque world. And the answer is not a lot, really. Typically, you know, the answer is well, it's a kind of social contract, isn't it? When you leave your house in the morning, there's a kind of implicit agreement that, well, I'm not going to go out today, stab my neighbour's gran and steal all of her cash. And I think that with that recognition of contingency does come a certain amount of upheaval, a kind of mass anxiety of, well, again, you know, constantly living in that feeling of, well, then what? What do I do?
And that, how did we get to that point then, that we've got this situation where I'm not saying this is universal, I'm not saying my interpretation of this is my interpretation. I'm not saying other people should, you know, accept it at face value, if you like, but go out and test your own sense of identity and unity, if you like. But how did we get to this point? Because we can only understand, if we understand how we've got to this point, we can understand maybe how we can move on from it.
Well, I think it owes a lot to use a bit more of a specific example in terms of the collapse of previous structures that governed meaning and gave people purpose. It's like, you know, the death of God post-Nietzsche. What do you do in a world that no longer offers you a secure set of values? Once that thing collapses and you start to realise that you can't rely on them so much for a sense of meaning.
But it's over 100 years since Nietzsche warned about that, and we don't seem to have done very much about taking on board that warning.
Well, I think it comes from sheerly the fact that, I mean, things take a long time. He was very ahead of his time. And there's a way of reading his writing as if all Nietzsche was really doing was working through his own depression and his own sort of particular set of anxieties and mental illnesses, which I think is a very valid interpretation, but also one that can be extrapolated to the culture at large, because it's obviously something. I feel hesitant to use the word obviously because not much is obvious, but the vast majority of people are going through a similar thing, especially on to use a topical example. Although it's something that has been obvious, I think, for a very long time, it's something that has become immediately obvious currently, that the political structures that exist, that are designed and supposed to be there in order to serve you and make your life better, actually don't have your best interests at heart. That at the top of these structures, or somewhere within that system, on pretty much every level, exist a set of individuals that are really only out for themselves. You know, the topical example is Boris Johnson enjoying his 12 or 16 parties during lockdown, and it's very hard, I think, as a normal human being to look at that and not feel entirely cheated. Like, it's almost like when your dad, you suddenly find out that your dad isn't there to look after you. He isn't this infallible being that's got your best interests at heart. Really, he's just a bit of a drunk that's looking out for himself. He's just after some quick kicks.
And lots of people live with that reality, and that's the kind of almost the dominant mode of living. It's what's prized, isn't it? We see it in our celebrities. We see it in certainly the culture I grew up in. The kind of the 90s and the noughties of being very much kind of Britpop and all that kind of stuff, and laddism and ladettes and all of that culture of the worst generation of parents. Maybe I think what was missing at that point was responsibility. Not for everybody. I'm not painting a totalistic view of this, but for enough people, we bought into the idea of hedonism, and the world would carry on opening up in front of us, and we could party and we could get by on the strength of our personalities. And then the reality is that you one day you wake up and you realise that you're in your 50s and you've got nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
What have you, or you question what you've got to show for it, and you pass that on generationally. So they kind of it's a marked difference. I don't know how true it is, but the generation Z or whatever they're called now are less inclined to drink because they've seen their parents' generation kind of go too far with British binge booze culture, which can't be explained as a European phenomenon, but maybe a Anglo-Saxon kind of phenomena. But we just seem to do it very, it's part of the collapse of certainty that we've suffered. I mean, post-industrialisation meant that people weren't going into, or haven't been going into intergenerational jobs and careers.
Well, I wonder, something that's just popped into my head now, if perhaps the reason why I would say, as a country, we're ahead of the rest of the world in terms of depression and binge drinking is the idea that maybe it has something to do with the collapse of the Great British Empire. England as a country used to be this towering force in world politics, something that we got to watch as a nation collapsed entirely, and we had to sort of reckon with our total...
Well, I don't think we've reckoned with it. I think it's an undealt with mindset. Obviously, the Germans and the Japanese were forced into reconstitution, both of their country, their politics and their psyche, if you like. And we've never done that here in the UK. We've lived off the myth of global Britain and greatness and exceptionalism, and that, we do it better than anybody else, which is manifestly not true anymore, unsustainable.
It's so obviously not true. I mean, even on a cultural level, it's, we used to be a cultural juggernaut, but it's hard to hold on to that belief when you find that a lot of the more interesting culture is coming out of other countries. I mean,
well, it does move on, doesn't it? It's like culture doesn't stay still, and you've got no guaranteed right to be I mean, for me, I think the cusp of, it's 10 years ago now, but the 2012 Olympics was the cusp of British cultural exceptionalism, and it's kind of been, I mean, I remarked at the time it was really just an expression of kind of charity shop Britain, kind of bring out all your old 80s pop stars and stuff and kind of regurgitate your myths about things, which is fine. There's a collective identity in playing the greatest hits and, having tribute bands define who you are. And you probably rightly would point out to lots of examples of innovative culture that takes place, but it doesn't feel as if it's happening around here. I don't feel as if I'm kind of part of it. Maybe maybe this is what I'm romantically feeling that I'm missing out again. It's passing me by. Where is it? Who's doing it? What's...
I'm not entirely sure in terms of like popular culture, things that people have access to all around the world and are enjoying on a really mass international level. I don't think we've accomplished anything really innovative and interesting for a very long time now.
So what do you look to then for that inspiration? Where do you draw on, where do you seek your nourishment, your cultural nourishment now?
Well, as you know, I read a lot of comic books, so that's always the sphere that I look to. And what I find particularly interesting about that is, in terms of the history of the comic book, in terms of like modernity, all of the really interesting stuff either happened quite a long time ago in France, or people are going to America to do it now. And there was, in I think the 80s and the 90s, a mass exodus from Britain of all of the greatest talents to America. And I think part of that is a recognition that you just can't accomplish anything really new and innovative here. There's almost there's a stagnant feel in the air. There's a sort of oppressive vibe that stifles creativity and genuine forward thinking. I mean, we live in a very conservative country. As part of my work, one of the things that I've been doing is reaching out to a lot of local politicians, MPs, mayors, stuff like that. And the amount of conservatives you bump into is really quite frightening.
Well, conservative in the sense of political allegiance, or conservative, cultural conservative?
Both, I think. The political leanings, who they identify with, conservative is always a dead giveaway. But even those that you think shouldn't necessarily be as conservative, like Labour or other parties, all of them have a very deep conservative vein that runs through their ideology.
Well,
There's nothing that really challenges that conservatism either.
I think interestingly at the moment, there's we're not led by conservatives, we're led by radicals who want to break things down. Brexit was about breaking down the institutions that we belong to, breaking down the support of people, and it's almost as if our politics is kind of becoming about, and you can see this as kind of emerging through what Starmer's trying to articulate about patriotism and institutions, and the notion of a conservative is shifting hands, if you like, from the right to the left, because the right seem to be engaged in a game of destruction and kind of confusion, if you like. You can't put your trust anywhere in anything. Institutions like the BBC or the courts or the universities, you can't trust them anymore. They're not bulwarks of our cultural identity. And that kind of mantle is being more taken up on the left to some extent. And that confuses everybody, because the progressives were always viewed to be on the left and the conservatives on the right. People like Michael Oakeshott had, said, kind of the definition of a conservative is somebody who doesn't engage in fantastical games, I suppose, about what might be, but you stick with what works because you've got that certainty that you know what works. But we're left in this kind of position in the middle of it. Go back to this idea of this oscillation between what we can anticipate on a certainty. We haven't got certainty on either side of the political discussion anymore. We're sceptical, seems to be. We're asked to be trusting, and we see people exhibit some kind of a sense of absolute certainty that their political tribe has done no wrong at all and cannot be broached. I mean, I don't know if you saw Nadine Dorris on the TV last night and recently, and she just really kind of defended Johnson in a way which brooked no doubt that anything was questionable not that anything was wrong, but that anything was questionable. So you've either got this kind of, to use a terrible phrase, hyper-certainty, or you've got this sense of kind of complete fatalism. And this is the Trumpian issue of complete kind of confusion, that you can actually respond to this wedge that's put through our collective mindset of saying, actually, we do know which way we're heading. We do know what is certain and what is uncertain. We do know what is of value. We do know what is worth handing down to future generations. It's just that we've got to get past this stage and deal with this lot before we can get to that. And the frustration just builds up.
I mean, yeah. It's interesting as well to go back to that idea between the oscillation of cynicism and sincerity. Is it seems that in the political sphere, at least, when it comes to everyday people and how they relate to politics, there is a great cynicism in regards to, trying to think of a good way to put it, not necessarily the ruling power, but the current government and what they're doing. It's like the majority of people, or at least the majority of people I speak to, can see through it almost immediately. And the natural response to that, again, out of that cynicism is born a sincerity, so they then relate to politics and that sphere in a much more sincere way. And say, well, I think of the comedian, are you familiar with Joe Lycett?
A bit.
Who recently released a bit of a statement or a comment on all of these parties and stuff when he saw it happen.
Oh, this is they released a joke version of the Sue Gray report.
Yeah.
And there was reports in the paper that the political apparatchiks had taken it seriously as if it was the report.
Yeah, but then there's two sides to that. There's that very cynical joke of the Sue Gray report, and then there was the very sincere response that came after that of well look, this is how I feel. I'm really pissed off because during lockdown and before COVID and everything, my friend was suffering from cancer, and I was there for him. I was a carer, and I watched him die, and I had to be there for him. And then when he finally passed during lockdown, it was without any great deal of fanfare, because we simply weren't allowed. We followed the rules that were set to us because we believed that that's what was best for us. And that anger then comes from, well, look at what they were doing at the same time. You know, when Joe Lycett was watching his friend die, they were having parties, they were having a great time, and it felt, and I think it does to a lot of people, feel like they were having a great time at the expense of ordinary people. It was one thing that I thought about a lot during COVID and the first lockdown, when they were talking about, when they sort of started to get things going again. And it was very obvious that we weren't out of the woods yet and that things were only going to get worse. And then here was the Prime Minister and the government talking about, well, we need to get things going again because otherwise the economy will suffer. And it felt like a kind of ritualistic sacrifice, or like, well, we'll offer up the poor and the people that literally can't live, and we'll just let them die. We'll let them get COVID so we can keep the economy running. But ultimately, who does that serve? It doesn't serve anybody but them and their mates and the people that already have money, because the economy as a whole doesn't really mean a great lot. So
you can never get yourself in a position to authenticate the emotional intent, because the political machine, if you like, is driven by public relations techniques of having a pre-prepared talking point answer which deflects. And if you see, when our politicians are expert at this, some are less expert than others, but there's an answer there to be able to say, look, that's not the real story. The real story is this, and that's not the real. Your pain isn't genuine, and there's a kind of a creation of doubt about your own experience that is introduced into a very thin fragment. This is the problem with having, I think, the kind of postmodern depthlessness, is that there's nothing underneath that underpins a sense of endurance, a capacity to live through periods of great change and hold on to something, regardless of what you think it is that people are holding on to. And I'm not saying that you should just agree with what those precepts might be. I think that's a dangerous position as well. But people can just get blown around in the wind. It's like, I mean, on occasions, if you use that as an analogy, trees are really great at enduring storms, but they're also really bad at enduring storms. Whereas grass, the seeds from the grass just gets blown around everywhere, and it's scattered, the weeds get scattered everywhere, and you kind of have to, the dualism of having the capability, the existential capability. At this point, our recording device overheated, and we lost the main mics, and we were walking around with another recorder as well, kind of picking up background sounds, and we'll learn and we'll do better next time.
Or a storm coming, you need to be able to say, well, this is how I need to respond to it. You need to be open to admit that sometimes you just wrong and move on and do something else and come at things from a different angle. Because there is no long way. Not that it would have ever happened. I think it would have gone a long way. Johnson had come out and said, you know what, I was wrong. I did a bad thing. I set one rule for everyone and another rule for myself. And I understand that what I've done has caused a great deal of harm and distress. And that can't be rebuilt easily, so I'm going to step aside. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
That comes from a kind of culture with, moral values, rather than just being, turning on the dial, absolutely great, but you've got to have the dial to turn on. Yep.
Catching. Yep.
So where do people find out more?
I'm on Twitter under Clayton Comics with an X instead of the C and the S.
And I'm at robwatsonmedia.net, and it's Rob W Media on Twitter and Instagram. But until next time, thanks very much.
Never known sadness like this before. Even though we've been acquainted, I'm sure. Since you've gone, I hear your voice in my head. It's alright, my darling, you said. Now I'm blown. Now I'm blown. Missing you. Missing you. I see you and your ATS blows, smiling face. I always saw right through. If only I could have one more day, I'd fix your heart back together again. But now I'm blown. Now I'm blown. Missing you. Missing you. We've got to fight for our right to party. We've got to fight for our right to party. We've got to fight for our right to party, to party. We've got to fight for our right to party.
You've been listening to Distraction Therapy with me, Rob Watson. Find out more at robwatsonmedia.net or follow me on Instagram and Twitter at RobWMedia.